For the past 42 years, I've woken up early on Mother's Day and gone straight to the kitchen. The smell of onions caramelizing, garlic sizzling in butter, the quiet bubbling of the tomato gravy that simmered low and long, those sounds and smells were part of our family rhythm, something I could do in my sleep. I always made the same things: baked manicotti stuffed with ricotta and parsley, a roasted leg of lamb for my late husband Tom, and a lemon pie with a flaky crust that always stuck just slightly to the pan because I refused to use anything but my grandmother's rolling pin, no matter how warped it was. I am Sharmila, but everyone calls me Sharm. And that Sunday morning, I stood in the same kitchen I'd cooked in since the Carter administration, hands working on autopilot, trying not to think about how quiet the house felt these days. My son, Julian, his wife Marta, and their 6-year-old daughter Layla lived with me now. Well, technically, I lived with them if you listen to Marta. She had a way of phrasing things that made it sound like I was the guest. But this was my house. I'd bought it with Tom the year Julian was born, back when the mortgage rate nearly killed us and we couldn't even afford a real couch. It was the only home I'd ever known. Around 9:30 a.m., Marta came into the kitchen, her long red hair pulled up like always in that perfect bun she never let fall even when she was home. She wasn't wearing makeup yet, but her lips were already pursed in that permanent line of disapproval. I was thinking, she said, leaning against the door frame, maybe this year I should handle the table setup. I already picked up fresh flowers. I paused, a wooden spoon hovering over the pot. You want to set the table? Yes, she said too quickly. Let me do something for once. That line, let me do something for once. As if I'd ever stopped her. As if I hadn't been begging to be involved when Layla had her last birthday party and Marta told me I could help by staying upstairs and resting. Still, I nodded and went back to stirring the gravy, though a part of me stiffened. Marta didn't offer help. She offered control. By the time Julian and Layla came down, the house smelled like tradition, like love, like the kind of memory a child tucks away for when they're old and wondering where everything went wrong. Layla skipped into the kitchen and hugged my leg, babbling about the dress Marta had picked for her and how she wanted to wear sparkly shoes. Julian, my only child, kissed my cheek and smiled distractedly, already buried in something on his phone. It was always like this now. Him, half here, half elsewhere. Always taking care of something. The table looked beautiful, I'll admit. Marta had arranged tulips in matching glass vases and printed tiny name cards with calligraphy fonts. There was one for me at the end of the table, not at the head where I always sat. No one said anything about it. I sat where they put me. Dinner was awkward from the start. Julian and Marta kept exchanging glances. Layla chattered between bites. I asked her about school, and Marta cut her off mid-sentence to correct her table posture. And then, just as I reached for the lemon pie to cut the first slice, Marta cleared her throat. So, we have an announcement, she said with a false brightness. We're taking a family trip. 10 days in Philadelphia. Julian found this amazing Airbnb with a rooftop pool, and Layla's been dying to see the Liberty Bell. Isn't that right, baby? Layla squealed. Julian added nothing. He just looked at me, smiled faintly, and then looked down at his plate. Oh, I said. When are you leaving? Tonight, Marta said, sipping her wine. Red eye. We'll be back on the 23rd. I blinked. That was tonight. Then Marta reached into her purse and pulled out a card. One of her fancy ones thick, with a printed gold leaf design. She handed it across the table to me. Inside, in perfectly slanted script, she'd written, "While we're away, could you tidy up the house a bit? A full deep clean. Floors, windows, garage, basement, and the back patio especially. We'd love to come home to a fresh space. Thank you." I read it twice and then again. I wanted to believe it was a joke. But when I looked up, Marta was already explaining logistics. Oh, and the nanny's coming with us, she said. So you'll have the house to yourself, finally. I thought you'd like that. Julian said nothing. Just silence, the kind that chokes you more than noise ever could. Did you really just give me a cleaning checklist for Mother's Day? I asked. Her eyebrows lifted in mock confusion. We're all pitching in. This is a family home. Everyone contributes. You don't want to feel useless, do you? I felt something inside me twist. It wasn't rage, not quite. It was closer to disbelief, to that moment when the person you love opens their mouth and says something so careless, so casually cruel, that you start to wonder if you ever really knew them. Julian still hadn't said a word. I set the card down beside my pie plate and folded my hands in my lap. The scent of lemon and sugar that had once made me feel like a queen now clung to the back of my throat like ash. It wasn't the first time Marta had humiliated me. But something about this smug little card, this staged dinner, this calculated trip, felt final. Like they were trying to tell me something without saying it out loud. That I was the help. That I wasn't part of the family anymore. That I was being dismissed. After dessert, they left to finish packing. Layla kissed me goodnight. Julian didn't. I sat at that table long after they'd gone upstairs, staring at the tulips and my half-eaten pie, wondering when exactly my son had stopped seeing me as his mother. But as I cleared the dishes one by one, a strange calm settled in me. They were going to Philadelphia. They'd be gone 10 days. And Marta, in her arrogance, had forgotten one thing. This was still my house. And I had 10 whole days to decide what to do about that. The morning after they left, I didn't cook. I didn't make tea. I didn't open the curtains. I simply sat in silence, wrapped in the shawl Tom gave me on our 20th anniversary, the one with the faded corners and snagged edges from years of faithful wear. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was loud, buzzing with questions I didn't want to answer yet. They were gone. Marta, Julian, Layla, even the nanny. Off to Philadelphia to play happy family in photos, in stories they'd tell others without me. That little card she'd handed me, folded like a birthday greeting, sat beside my untouched teacup on the dining room table. A relic of humiliation. I hadn't moved it. I wanted to keep it there for a while longer, like a scar you press just to make sure you still feel pain. I finally stood around 10 and began walking through the house, not in the usual way, where I cleaned or tidied or checked for leaks in the laundry room, but slowly, deliberately, like a visitor, as if I needed to reacquaint myself with this place. My home. Only it didn't look like mine anymore. In the hallway, the framed cross-stitch Tom's mother made, the one I'd kept by the coat rack for decades, had been taken down. In its place was a framed black and white photo of some bridge in Denmark. Marta had a thing for sterile, curated spaces. Everything had become gray and beige and stainless steel. The doilies I crocheted? Gone. The little ceramic birds from my mother's old house? Boxed and shoved somewhere, I wasn't sure where anymore. Even the walls felt colder. In the living room, the armchair where Tom used to read his detective novels had been pushed near the patio door, turned at a strange angle like an afterthought. A massive cream sectional couch now took up most of the room, slick with synthetic fabric that always made me sweat behind the knees. The bookshelves were gone, replaced with white floating slabs holding objects I had never touched. Glass vases, scented candles, decorative bowls filled with pale stones. None of it had anything to do with us. The dining room still had the old table, but she'd changed the chairs, modern, angular ones that dug into my back. And my china? The floral Royal Albert set Tom bought me one piece at a time over 10 Christmases? Replaced. Marta had tucked it into a bottom cabinet years ago to make room for her matte black plates and gold-rimmed wine glasses, the kind that look like props and sound hollow when you tap them. Everywhere I looked, it was clear. I hadn't been living in my house. I'd been occupying space in Marta's. Upstairs, I opened the door to the room Julian and Marta now called the primary suite. It used to be mine and Tom's. The smell was different, her perfume, a mix of white musk and something sharp, dominated everything. My lilac linen sachets were long gone. Even the quilt I made with my sister after Tom and I returned from our 10th anniversary trip had been replaced with some cold designer duvet that looked like it belonged in a hotel. I hesitated at the closet. I hadn't opened it since they took over the room 3 years ago. Most of my things had been removed, thinned out, boxed up, handed down, Marta said. Just until they finished the renovations, she'd said. I opened the door. Her clothes, perfectly spaced, color-coordinated, filled the entire rack. Not a single thing of mine in sight. On the floor, 6 pairs of high heels stood in formation like soldiers. A shoebox with a receipt for something leather Italian, no doubt, was left half open, as if she'd flung it aside mid-rush. And there, on the dresser by the window, was a stack of mail. Marta always brought the mail upstairs, even though the entryway table was meant for it. She said she hated clutter by the door. A few envelopes had been left open. One had slid slightly out of the stack. I didn't mean to read it. I really didn't. But when I saw the words second home mortgage statement printed at the top, something in my stomach sank. Our mortgage had been paid off 23 years ago. I pulled the envelope free. Inside was a monthly statement addressed to Marta E. Simmons, her maiden name. But it was our address. The loan balance, according to the statement, was 0. The loan itself had originated 5 years ago and been closed just 3 months back. The strangest part? The payments had come from Julian's business account. Regular, automatic transfers. Large ones. My son is an architect, not a millionaire, and yet he'd been paying thousands every month for 5 years for a mortgage that wasn't even in his name. I sat on the edge of the bed, the statement shaking in my hand. It didn't make sense. And then I noticed something else at the bottom, small and easily missed, was the name of the bank account the funds had been transferred to. Not Julian's name. Marta's the account was solely in Marta's name. And there it was. The truth, printed on cheap paper and dropped carelessly in a drawer. She had taken money from my son. She'd set up a fake second mortgage on the house that had long been paid off and redirected those payments, his money, into an account only she had access to. For 5 years. My hands went cold. That trip to Paris she took with her friend Ava, Julian had said they'd won a giveaway. The spa retreat in Sedona. The new Audi she claimed was a lease deal too good to pass up. The expenses that always seemed to disappear into the fog of personal finances, and we keep separate accounts to keep things clean. It had all been a lie. Julian didn't know. He couldn't have. He never would have agreed to something like this. He was too trusting, too conflict avoidant. He hated financial talk, always letting Marta handle the household budget while he buried himself in project blueprints and overtime hours. My son had been working himself sick, and she had been bleeding him dry. My first instinct was to call him. But what would I say? That I'd been snooping? That I found proof his wife had been stealing from him for half a decade and hiding it in plain sight? He wouldn't believe me. Or worse, he would believe me, and then what? The silence in the room seemed to close in around me, thick and watchful. I tucked the statement back into the envelope and slid it between the pages of an old book on the dresser. I'd need it later. Right now, I had to think. Not feel. Not cry. Not even rage. Think because Marta had crossed a line. She hadn't just disrespected me. She had manipulated my son, lied to him, taken his money, twisted his trust into a weapon. And now she was gone for 10 days. 10 days with no eyes on me. 10 days of empty rooms and unlocked drawers and secrets that thought they were safe. I stood and looked around the bedroom one more time. My bedroom. Their bedroom. Whatever it was now. She had pushed me out of the house, one small decision at a time. Now she was going to find out what happens when the house pushes back. By mid-afternoon. The house was so quiet it sounded like it had forgotten how to breathe. Not even the refrigerator hummed. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the same folded card Marta had left me. While we're away, could you tidy up the house a bit? As if her words had the right to occupy this space longer than she did. I slid the card into the trash. Then I went to the hallway, reached up behind the upper coat shelf, and retrieved the old manila envelope I hadn't touched in 15 years. The paper was brittle from time and heat. The handwriting on the front tomes was neat and faintly smudged, as if he'd written it in a hurry but wanted to make sure it still looked presentable. House papers. Do not discard. I carried the envelope into the dining room, sat at the head of the table where I used to sit before Marta decided it wasn't my place anymore, and slowly began pulling out the contents. Utility records, old tax returns, receipts from our roof repair in '98, blueprints from when we had the sunroom added. And finally, there it was, the original deed to the house. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From something older, heavier. something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. My name there it was, Sharmila Singh, sole owner, listed both on the original purchase agreement and on the title transfer we filed after Tom passed. His lawyer had insisted we do it by the book. Tom had wanted everything to be simple for me if something ever happened to him. He didn't like chaos. He liked his tools hung straight and his papers filed in labeled folders. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal and felt a knot in my chest begin to loosen. They'd acted like this house belonged to them. Like I was just lucky they hadn't thrown me into some facility yet. But the paper in my hands said something else. They were guests, unwanted ones, and their welcome had expired. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Singh and Adler Law, a young voice answered. This is Sharmila Singh. I need to speak with Harvey Adler. A brief pause. Then, one moment, ma'am. Seconds later, the warm gravel of Harvey's voice greeted me. Sharm? Well, I'll be damned. How long's it been? Long enough, I said. I need to ask you something, and I need a clear answer. About the house. Shoot. If I have the original deed, and it shows my name as the sole owner, and no one else's, that means the house is still mine, right? He didn't hesitate. Unless you sold it or added someone else to the title, yes. You're the legal owner. No one else has any right to the property unless you've signed something that says otherwise. I haven't. Then it's yours, Sharm. Every floorboard and faucet. Why? Something wrong. I hesitated. Let's just say, I let other people treat me like a guest in my own home. And I'm done letting them. Sounds like you've got a plan. I do, I said, and hung up. I sat there for a long time. The weight of the paper in my lap felt heavier than any insult Marta had ever lobbed at me. Heavier than Julian's silence. It was a kind of proof you don't get in everyday life. A confirmation that I hadn't imagined the life I built here. That it wasn't foolish or sentimental to feel attached to walls that had held my laughter, my grief, my marriage, my child. I stood and walked slowly back through the house. Each step felt different now. This wasn't a tomb. This wasn't a stage for Marta's Pinterest fort. It was mine. And it was time to make it look like mine again. I started in the entryway, where her oversized bamboo mirror had replaced the painting of Lake Beamtall my father had sent me in '74. The mirror came down and went straight into the garage. I dusted off the wrapped painting from storage and rehung it, careful to center it just so. In the living room, I removed the soulless coffee table books, stacked just for appearances, and filled the shelves with my actual books. My yellowed copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The Hindi poetry collection my college roommate gave me. Tom's gardening guides, the spines cracked and marked with his handwriting. I moved on to the bedroom. Her lotions. Her decorative jars. Her matching set of silk sleepwear that always smelled like money and insincerity. I packed them all into a box. A large, quiet, neutral box. And then I opened the windows wide and let the breeze carry her scent out of the room. By evening, I'd filled 5 boxes. 3 from the closet, 1 from the bathroom, 1 from the downstairs office that had once been Tom's workshop until Marta turned it into her personal workspace, with a reclaimed wood desk she never used and an expensive floor lamp that served no purpose. The nanny's room, left untouched. She'd always been kind to me. Once, she handed me a piece of birthday cake from Layla's party when Marta was too busy bragging about the event planner. Once, she'd seen me crying in the laundry room and just quietly closed the door behind her and left a cup of tea on the dryer without saying a word. The last step came the next morning. I called Mr. DeLuca, the locksmith who'd replaced our front door handle back in 2009. Mrs. Singh, he asked, surprised. I need a lock change. 3 doors. Front, back, garage entry. Today, if possible. He showed up just after lunch. While he worked, I packed Marta's kitchenware, the black plates, the gold cocktail shakers, the tiny avocado slicer that she insisted was a necessity but never used. And when the new locks were in, Mr. DeLuca handed me a set of keys and asked, "Want any spares made?" "No," I said. "Just these." That night, I made a simple meal, lentil soup and rice. I sat in the kitchen with the windows open, the quiet hum of crickets outside, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in my own home. I wasn't afraid of what would happen when they came back. I wasn't angry either. I was ready. Because there's something people like Marta never seem to understand. You can redesign the house. You can redecorate the walls. You can even push someone into a corner and try to make them forget who they are. But the house remembers. And so does the woman who built it. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window just right, golden and soft, the way it used to before Marta changed the curtains to something stiff and beige. I had taken those down the night before, folded them neatly, and put them in the bottom of the donation box with the cold ceramic vases and her abstract metal wall art. Today, I was going to reclaim the house on paper and in presents. I tucked the envelope with the deed into my purse, just in case, and headed to the hardware store. It was only a 10-minute drive, but I took the long way. I passed the school where Julian used to run out of the doors grinning, his backpack bouncing behind him. I passed the park where Tom once pushed him on the swing for what felt like hours, just so I could sit on the bench and read my novel. So many small moments, buried beneath years of quiet erasure. At the store, the man behind the counter looked to be in his 60s and had a slow, unhurried way of speaking that made me trust him immediately. I need 5 copies of this, I said, handing over the fresh front door key. Big family? He asked, turning the blank keys through his fingers. No, I said. A small circle, but solid. 5 keys. One for me, obviously. One for Aruna, my cousin, who lived 3 blocks away and never once missed a birthday. One for Mrs. Green, my neighbor since 1987, who brought me chicken soup when I had bronchitis and used to water my roses when Tom and I went on road trips. One for the nanny, Clara, not because I expected her to return, but because I hoped she would, and I trusted her. And one for Michael, my late sister's son, who always called me auntie even when the rest of the family had slowly faded into silence. Not Marta, not Julian, not anymore. I returned home with the warm clink of new keys in my purse and a determination I hadn't felt in years. The kind that starts in your bones and spreads outward. The kind you don't need to announce because it speaks for itself. Next, I listed the sectional sofa online. The one Marta had ordered custom-made, too wide for the room, too modern for comfort, and too expensive to be practical. A young couple came within hours to pick it up. Mid-century modern, they called it. Mid-century meaningless, I muttered after the door closed. With the cash, I went to the thrift store on the edge of town. Not a glossy showroom, but a warm one. Worn wood floors, the smell of old paperbacks and clean laundry. I took my time. No one rushed me. No one questioned my taste. I found a deep floral armchair like the one Tom used to nap in after Sunday lunch. A walnut sideboard that reminded me of the one my parents had in our deli flat. A simple rectangular table with mismatched chairs, each one with character. A soft green rug that didn't scream design, it whispered welcome. Back home, I opened the windows and let the fresh air carry out the last remnants of cold polish and curated silence. I moved through each room with a slow rhythm, shifting furniture, scrubbing corners Marta never touched, dusting off memories that had been boxed up for years. I took down the oversized black and white photos of foreign skylines and replaced them with our pictures. Julian at 7, a chocolate cake smeared across his chin, laughing with his father in the backyard. My parents on their wedding day, sepia-toned and smiling shyly. Tom and me at Niagara Falls in '91, his arm around my shoulders, his coat too big for both of us. Family photos. The kind Marta had deemed a little cluttered for common areas. I placed them right in the hallway, next to the staircase, where everyone would see them the moment they walked in. This house stopped being a showroom. It became my home again. In the evenings, I started lighting candles, real ones. Not the battery-operated ones Marta scattered around for ambience. I cooked with cumin and cardamom again. I fried garlic in oil and let the smell linger. I stopped apologizing for how I lived. I brought the house back to life the way it had once lived, full of color, sound, and memory. By the 3rd day, I walked barefoot across the living room and realized I wasn't walking lightly anymore. I wasn't tiptoeing around someone else's vision. I was standing firmly on my own ground. This was my house. Not in theory. Not just on paper. but in truth, in detail, in warmth. And for the first time in years, I was no longer waiting for permission to exist in it. I heard the tires on the driveway before I saw the car. The hum of that shiny SUV Marta insisted on leasing, a necessary upgrade. She had told Julian rolled to a stop outside the house just before noon. Right on schedule. I stood in a living room, hands resting calmly on the back of my newly reupholstered floral chair. The house around me was no longer a shell of someone else's taste. The photos were back on the walls. The soft hum of a ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, and the scent of cardamom tea filled the space. Then came the sounds I'd been expecting. The first was the fumbling of keys. A pause, the jingling again. Louder. More frantic. A thump, then Marta's voice, shrill and sharp, slicing through the calm like a rusty knife. What the hell is going on? I walked slowly to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. There they were. Julian looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled from travel, his expression confused, brows furrowed. Layla stood beside him, holding a stuffed animal and blinking in the sun, unsure of what was happening. Marta, in designer sunglasses and a white travel jacket, stood frozen on the porch, key in hand, mouth slightly open. "Mom," Julian said, "why don't our keys work?" I stepped aside just far enough that they could see the inside of the house. Gone was the enormous cream sectional. In its place was a warm brown couch, soft and low, with one of Tom's old Afghans draped over the back. Gone were Marta's stark black and white photos, replaced by our family photos, arranged in a collage that covered the far wall. The dining room table was new, well, old, but new to us, and surrounded by mismatched chairs that had history, not branding. The entire house looked like someone lived here, someone who remembered why it had once been called home. Julian stepped forward again, gripping the handle. "What happened?" "I changed the locks," I said quietly. "You what?" Marta's voice pitched up so fast and sharp I thought Layla would cry. "You changed the locks while we were gone. You can't just, this is our home." I tilted my head slightly, watching her unravel. "It was never yours, Marta. It's mine. Always has been." Julian blinked, glancing between us. "Mom, what are you talking about? Of course it's your house, but why the locks?" "Why no?" I stepped outside onto the porch, careful not to raise my voice. "Because I found something while you were gone. A mortgage statement. In Marta's name. With money being pulled from your account." He blinked. "Mortgage," he echoed. "But the house is paid off." "Yes," I said. "It's been paid off for over 20 years. Your father and I paid every cent. But for the last 5 years, Marta's been moving money, your money, into an account under her name. She used a fake second mortgage to make it look like she was paying down debt on the house. She wasn't." He turned to her slowly, as if the air had just gone thin around him. "Marta?" She let out a sharp laugh. "This is insane. She must have misunderstood. I never took money for myself. I was helping us. That money went to improvements, vacations, the new car. Everything I did was for this family." I looked at the statement, I said, holding my ground. "It was in your maiden name. Not joint. Just yours." I had to protect something for Layla's future. She snapped, the words tumbling now, each one more desperate than the last. "Julian never looks at the finances. Someone had to think ahead. His mother, your mother, is trying to manipulate you." She turned to Julian then, her voice suddenly trembling with injured pride. "She's always hated me. From the beginning. She never wanted me here. This is her revenge." "Marta," Julian said, his voice suddenly thin. "Is it true?" "What part?" "That you took money out of our account, pretending it was for a mortgage that didn't exist?" Marta went silent. Layla shifted beside them, holding tighter to her stuffed animal. She looked up at her father, then her mother, eyes wide. Then Marta's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her hand reached out to steady herself on the porch railing. And just like that, her knees buckled. She collapsed in a faint, her body crumpling on the welcome mat. Julian caught her halfway down. "Marta," he shouted. "Marta?" I took a step back, breathing slowly, my hands still calm at my sides. She was faking it, I was sure of that. Maybe not fully, but enough to shift the attention, enough to play the victim, enough to delay accountability. It was her pattern. I didn't rush to her. Julian knelt beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. Layla started crying, and Clara, the nanny, who had been retrieving bags from the car, ran up and took the child's hand, leading her gently toward the side of the house. A minute later, Marta stirred, groaned, and opened her eyes as if waking from a bad dream. She looked straight at me. "You can't do this," she whispered hoarsely. "You can't just throw us out. We have nowhere else to go." I met her eyes. "I didn't throw you out," I said evenly. "You never lived here. You took up space. You took control. But this house was never yours. And after what you've done to my son, to this home, you're not stepping back in today. Maybe not ever." Julian looked up, his expression dazed. "Where are we supposed to go?" he asked, not with anger, but with the slow realization of someone watching the ground shift under their feet. "There's a hotel on Hawthorne Avenue," I said. "Or you could stay with Marta's mother. She was always so concerned about me living in this big, impractical house. I'm sure she'd welcome you both." Marta whimpered. "You're cruel." "No," I said. "I just stopped letting you pretend I'm invisible." Julian stood, slowly, still stunned. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a key. He just helped Marta to the car while Clara settled Layla in the back seat. Before they drove away, Julian turned back. I didn't know." I nodded. "I know you didn't. But you know now." He opened his mouth like he might say more. But then he shut it again, walked back to the car, and drove away. I watched them disappear down the road. And then I went back inside, closed the door behind me, and locked it with my key. 3 days passed. 3 days of quiet mornings with real tea and the radio softly humming Hindi classics. 3 days of uninterrupted sleep, no footsteps upstairs, no clattering dishes left in the sink for later. 3 days of breathing in a house that, for the first time in years, felt like it belonged to no one but me. I had no regrets. I had lived too long in a house that had forgotten the woman who built it. But late in the afternoon on the third day, I looked out the front window and saw a familiar car pull into the driveway, slower this time. Not with the confidence of ownership, but the hesitance of someone who finally understood the weight of trespassing. Julian stepped out alone. He didn't have Layla or Marta or bags or anything that looked like a performance. He wore jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, and his eyes looked like they hadn't known sleep in days. I opened the door before he knocked. He hesitated on the porch, unsure. And then, with an almost boyish movement, he looked down and held out the old house key I'd replaced. "I guess this doesn't work anymore," he said quietly. I took it from him. "No, it doesn't." He nodded, accepting that. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "You're always welcome to visit." Julian entered like a stranger might, shoulders tense, careful not to brush the walls. His eyes flicked across the furniture, the photos on the walls, the rug near the fireplace where he used to play with his Legos for hours. He sat down in Tom's old chair, the one he'd once called Dad's throne as a child. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for a long time said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't rush to forgive him. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. And we both knew it. I let it happen," he continued, eyes locked on the floor. "For years. I watched Marta push you out of the rooms you decorated. I let her call your food old-fashioned. I let her call your stories long-winded. I let her say you didn't need to be involved in Layla's school things or birthdays or holidays. And I agreed with her sometimes. Not because I believed her. At least not at first." He looked up at me then, and I saw it, the boy I raised, buried under the weight of choices he hadn't fully understood until now. "I just wanted peace," he said. "She hated conflict. Every time I pushed back, she'd stop talking to me for days. She'd get icy. I wanted a quiet house. For Layla. For myself. And I thought, if you were a little more distant, maybe things would be smoother." I sat across from him, but didn't interrupt. "But then I started to believe her," he admitted. She'd say things like, "Your mom needs to rest. She shouldn't be doing this or that. She's too old for this." And then it became, "She's difficult. She's judgmental. She's in the way." And God help me, I believed it. I started to see through her eyes. I let that hang in the air. It hurt, but it was the truth. He rubbed his face with both hands. But that money, the mortgage lie, that opened everything. Like I'd been walking around in a fog for years, and suddenly I saw the wreckage. He looked at me again. I hired a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. I want custody of Layla. Full custody. And I'm going to fight to get the money back. There was a firmness in his voice I hadn't heard in years. Not since he was a teenager, standing up to a school bully for a friend. That fire had been gone for a long time, smothered under years of compromise and quiet shame. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. Does she know? She knows I moved out. That I'm serious. That I know about the account. She's furious. And scared. His voice wavered. But Mom, if I had just stood up sooner, Julian, I said gently. No, he blinked, startled. I reached for his hand. You want me to say we can go back to how it was? But we can't. His mouth opened slightly, but I continued. I loved you before you could speak. I held you through sickness, through nightmares, through scraped knees and broken hearts. I stayed up all night when you got your first rejection letter from university. I know who you are. Tears gathered in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. I never stopped loving you, I said. Even when you stopped defending me. Even when you started believing lies about me. But I won't pretend those years didn't happen. And I won't pretend they didn't change me. He nodded slowly, his head bowed in shame. We have to start fresh, I said. We can't rebuild what used to be. That version of us, mother and son, you leaning on me for everything, me carrying the weight of this family, that's over. We build something new. Something real. Grown up. Equal. He took a shuddering breath and whispered, I want that. I do too, I said, and I meant it. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the oak tree Tom planted the year Julian was born. Its roots had grown deep, strong enough to withstand any storm. Like us, I thought. Like we could be it was just after dinner, simple dal and rice, the way Tom used to like it when Julian returned for the second time that week. This time, I didn't hesitate to unlock the door. He stepped inside with less hesitation, as if he no longer needed permission to enter his own history. There was still something weighed across his shoulders, though. A different kind of heaviness. The kind that comes from facing someone you used to love, someone who now stands between you and everything that matters. We sat in the kitchen. No tea, no food, just quiet. The kind that doesn't beg to be filled. He leaned forward again, his hands clasped tightly. She's threatening to take the kids, he said, voice low but clear. She said she'd accuse you of being unfit. Dangerous, even. I felt the air leave my lungs not in fear, but in weariness. Unfit. The word echoed through my head like a dull knock on a locked door. As if the woman who once stitched Layla's Halloween costume by hand, who held her through her fever when Clara was out of town, who never once raised her voice in anger, as if that woman could ever be unfit to love her own granddaughter. She said if I don't stop pursuing the financial case, Julian went on, if I don't drop the divorce and apologize for siding with you, she'll tell the court you manipulated me. That you turned me against her. That you poisoned our daughter against her, too. He shook his head. But I'm not giving in, he said simply. Not this time. I stayed quiet, studying the man across from me. My son, yes, but not the boy I raised. That boy was gone. And maybe that was a good thing. Because this man, tired, bruised by years of silence, but standing upright, was the one I'd been waiting to meet for years. I spoke with my lawyer, he continued. We're preparing. We'll fight the custody battle if we have to. But we're also documenting everything. Every transfer. Every deception. Every threat. I won't let her rewrite the story. There was steel in his voice now. And something else. Something that had always been there, but was finally coming to the surface. Resolve. I don't know what kind of lies she'll try to tell, he said. But I'm ready to stand up in court, in front of anyone, and say the truth out loud. That you were humiliated. That I let it happen. That I won't let it happen again. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I exhaled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a notebook, small, brown leather. Inside were pages of numbers, notes, statements. I've started calculating, he said. Everything she moved from my accounts. Everything she took in my name. I'll pay it back. Every dollar. I don't care how long it takes. I didn't say thank you. It didn't feel right. This wasn't a favor. This wasn't a gift. This was accountability, long overdue. Instead, I nodded. And then I said the thing I'd been thinking about for days. If we're going to move forward, Julian, we need rules. He looked up surprised. Rules. Yes, I said firmly. Boundaries. Schedules. Structure. We don't go back to what we were. We go forward carefully. And honestly. He nodded slowly. Okay, what kind of rules? Regular visits, I said. With Layla. With Michael, too, if he ever comes back from university. I want to be in their lives. Not occasionally. Not on birthdays. But involved. Agreed. No surprises, I added. If something happens with the case, with her, with the kids, I hear it from you directly. Not through lawyers. Not through Clara. Of course. And if you ever feel yourself slipping back into that silence, Julian, the kind where you let someone else steer talking, I want you to come here. Sit across from me like this. And speak. He swallowed hard. I will. There was a long pause. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was earned. Then, softly, he asked, Can Layla come by this weekend? I smiled. She can come tomorrow. His eyes welled slightly. She misses you. I miss her too. And I did. I missed her messy drawings and her mismatched socks. I missed the way she used to crawl into my lap without asking, all elbows and questions. I missed the warmth of being needed not as a maid or a nuisance, but as grandma. Julian stood, ran a hand through his hair. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Yes, I said, but we've already survived the worst part. He walked to the door, then turned. Mom? Yes. I hope someday, when she's older, Layla sees this and understands what it costs to put things right. She will, I said. Then I closed the door behind him. I leaned against it for a long moment, listening to the silence. It no longer felt lonely. It felt like a beginning. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Marta would not retreat quietly. She never had. There would be hearings, accusations, long, exhausting explanations. But I was ready. Because dignity once lost, when finally reclaimed, isn't a quiet thing. It's a force. And I wasn't giving mine up ever again. It started like any other Friday. The kitchen smelled faintly of rosewater from the batch of sweets I'd finished the night before, Layla's request, of course, because she'd recently learned the word barfi and decided she liked how it sounded on her tongue. I'd woken up early, boiled the milk slowly, stirred in the sugar, crushed the pistachios the way my mother used to, with a heavy mortar, not a machine. I never minded doing it for her. By late morning, the sun stretched long across the dining room table. The birds were fussing in the hedge near the kitchen window, and the radio played something soft and familiar. I had just sat down with my tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting Julian yet. When I opened the door, no one was there, just the breeze, the whirring of the neighbor's lawnmower, and a large white envelope resting on the doormat, weighted by a smooth river stone. My name was written on it in thick black pen, formal and unfamiliar. I picked it up, turned it over. A legal seal was embossed in the corner. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the still warm tea, and I just looked at it. It's funny how much power paper holds. A single envelope, thick and official, can curl your stomach and make you forget you were singing 10 minutes ago. It can make a safe, solid morning feel like a trapdoor. When I finally opened it, I read every word twice. It was from Marta's lawyer. A formal notice. Petition for property entitlement. My breath didn't catch. I didn't feel rage. Just that low, deep ache of disappointment. The kind you only get from people who once shared your dinner table. She was contesting the house. Not claiming ownership directly, but alleging undue influence on Julian, a recharacterization of assets, and retaliatory occupancy. She was alleging that I had exploited my position as a mother and grandmother to reclaim exclusive control over marital property. In plain language, She was accusing me of manipulating her family, and she wanted compensation. She couldn't touch the deed. Not legally. Harvey Adler had already confirmed that months ago. But she was clever in the way that makes people dangerous. She didn't need to win. She just needed to cost me time, peace, energy, money. I set the envelope down, poured myself a second cup of tea, and stood by the window. Outside, the garden was blooming. Tomato vines curling around their trellises, little white jasmine flowers opening in the corner bed. A few years ago, Marta had tried to tear out the garden. Too messy, she'd said. No structure. No design. She'd planted ornamental grass in perfect rows. The grass had died after 2 seasons. It needed too much control. The jasmine returned on its own. An hour later, Julian arrived with the children. Layla ran inside first, pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders, arms wide. "Grandma, I brought my book. Can we finish the story from last time?" Michael followed close behind, already halfway through unzipping his hoodie. "Are the pillows still in the basket? I want to build the ship again." I smiled and nodded, kissing both their heads. "Of course, but wash up first. Your hands are sticky." They raced to the bathroom. Julian walked in slower. He noticed the envelope on the counter instantly. "She did it," he said quietly. "I figured she would." I said nothing, just poured him a cup of tea and slid it across the table. We stood in silence, both of us watching the children chatter in the other room. "She's angry," he continued. "She's losing control. This is her way of keeping her hand in the door." I turned to him, voice calm but tired. "It won't work, but it will take something from me." He nodded. "I know. I'm already on the phone with Harvey. We'll respond properly. You won't have to deal with it alone." I wanted to tell him I wasn't afraid, that she couldn't hurt me anymore. But that wasn't true. She could hurt me, if not through legal threats, then through the fear that this new chapter I'd fought so hard for could still be contaminated by her shadow. Not again, I thought. Not again. "I won't let her drag this house back into chaos," I said. "Not this time." Julian looked at me carefully. "What do you need from me?" It was the right question. Not, "How do we fix it?" Not, "What do I do?" Just, "What do you need?" "I need you to keep showing up," I said. "That's all. I don't need you to fight for me. I don't need you to repay me. I need to know I'm not going through this alone again." "You're not," he said without hesitation. "Ever again." Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed and the dishes were done, I sat with Clara on the porch. She'd come by after her evening shift to bring me a box of mangoes from her cousin's farm. We didn't talk about the letter. She had heard about it already from Julian. Instead, she said she thought she could erase you. "Replace you." I said nothing. "But you're in the walls," Clara said softly. "You're in the spice jars, the stitching on the curtains, the soil under the roses. This house is made of you." I looked at her and smiled, suddenly and unexpectedly moved. "That's why she hates it," she added. "Because no matter how many chairs she bought or pictures she hung, she could never own that." And Clara was right. Even if Marta had filed 100 petitions, even if she paid 10 lawyers, even if she stood on my doorstep with a megaphone, she would never be home here, because this house knew who built it. The next morning, Layla climbed into my bed before sunrise, the way she used to when she was smaller. "I couldn't sleep," she whispered. I turned on my side and looked at her in the pale light. "Nightmares?" I asked gently. "No," she said. "I was just thinking. At Mom's house, everything's quiet now. Like too quiet. Like weird quiet." I didn't speak. She rested her cheek on my shoulder. "I like it here better. It smells like pancakes and books and something else." "What's the something else?" She thought hard. "Like stories. Like people used to laugh a lot here. I like that." I kissed the top of her head and let her stay. Later that day, we baked again, new pancakes, extra soft, with chocolate chips this time. Michael built a new fort and declared himself captain of the moonship, and I let him hang my old shawl as a flag from the banister. Julian fixed the hinge on the bathroom door. Clara brought over lentil soup for lunch. And the letter? It sat on the corner of the kitchen counter, untouched. A reminder. Not of fear, but of everything I had survived. The threats, the silences, the humiliation, the slow push out of my own space. I had been made invisible, rewritten, ignored, and I had risen, not with shouting, not with revenge, but by staying, by reclaiming. That letter would be answered, yes, properly, legally, with facts and lawyers and signatures, but not with fear, because I was not going to lose myself again trying to defend what was already mine. That night, I tucked the children into bed with full stomachs and stories. I stood for a moment outside their room, watching their soft, even breathing in the quiet. This house, I thought, was not just bricks and wood. It was a sanctuary. And this family, scarred but healing, was no longer broken. We were in the middle of the story now. Past the pain, but not yet at the end. Rebuilding takes time. Trust grows slowly. But we had roots now. And no petition, no bitterness, no woman blinded by her own greed would ever be able to dig those out again. The card had been sitting in the drawer of the old sideboard for months. I hadn't touched it since the day I cleaned the kitchen, not long after they left for Philadelphia, before the locks were changed and the lies unraveled. I hadn't thrown it away either. Sometimes, when you survive something long enough, even your scars start asking for context. It was raining that morning lightly, not a storm. The kind of rain that makes the garden smell deeper, like soil and sweetness. The house was still and quiet, but not empty. Never empty anymore. Julian and the children had left the night before, and their laughter still lingered in the corners. I made my tea slowly, hands steady, movements soft. I poured it into my favorite mug, the blue one with the chipped rim, the one Marta once tried to throw out because it looks poor. I'd pulled it from the garbage quietly, cleaned it, and tucked it out of sight. Now it lived right up front in the cupboard, where it belonged. I carried my tea to the living room, the place where all the erasure used to begin. For years, it had been staged for someone else's performance, neutral furniture, and used decor, cold, colorless walls. Now it was filled with life again, a quilt folded neatly on the armrest, children's drawings clipped to a line of string above the fireplace, and framed photos of people who mattered. And there, beside the brass lamp, was the drawer. I opened it slowly. The card was still there, it hadn't changed. Still smooth. Still beige. Still folded neatly in half like something polite. I opened it, family trip. Back in 10 days. Please clean the whole house before we return. Marta, thank you for your service. 8 words, 6 of them coded in command, and 2 that had once cut deeper than they had any right to. Thank you for your service. At the time, they had felt like spit. A dismissal. A way to reduce everything I had given years, love, silence, sacrifice, into something impersonal and cheap. A phrase that didn't see the woman behind it. The mother. The grandmother. The human being. But now, I smiled not because it was funny, but because the words no longer had the power they used to. They had aged badly. She had written them to humiliate me, but all they did now was remind me that I had survived her. That was the day everything began to change. Mother's Day, how fitting. I thought the day meant to honor women like me had almost been used to erase me. But instead, it marked the moment I remembered who I was and who I was never going to be again. I placed the card gently on the mantel, just beside a small framed photo of Layla holding her plate of pancakes. Not as a trophy, not as a warning, but as a symbol. A quiet artifact of the day I stopped apologizing for my existence. Julian came by in the afternoon with the children. It had become a kind of rhythm. Friday dinner, Saturday fort building, Sunday gardening. They never called first anymore. They didn't need to. The house was theirs, in the way that families truly share, not through ownership, but through presence. Layla ran in first, holding a picture she had drawn in class. It was a crooked house with flowers outside and a smiling woman in a sari on the front steps. "It's you, Grandma," she said proudly. "And this is your house." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. Michael was trailing behind, arms full of cardboard tubes and masking tape. "I'm building a telescope," he announced. But not for looking at stars. For looking at secrets. "Well, then," I said, crouching down, "make sure it only finds the good ones." Julian stepped inside last, holding a bag of samosas from the market. He glanced at the fireplace, at the card now propped beside the photo. You kept it? He asked, surprised. Yes. He hesitated. Why? I looked at him, smiled gently. Because it reminds me that I'll never be small again. He nodded slowly. There was no guilt in his face anymore, only understanding. He had made peace with the past, not by forgetting it, but by showing up day after day in this new version of our life. He no longer apologized for old wounds. He honored them by living differently. He handed me the bag. Spicy, just how you like them. Later that night, after the children were tucked in and Julian had gone home, I sat again in the living room. Rain tapped softly on the windows. The lamp cast a warm glow across the rug. And in the silence, I felt it, the full shape of my life, finally mine again. I thought back over everything the quiet degradation, the way Marta had slowly taken over my home, one item at a time. My books moved, my cookware stored, my voice dismissed at every family gathering. How she had told Julian, in 100 different ways, that I was too much, too old, too inconvenient. And how I had let her, because I thought silence would buy peace. But silence never brings peace, it only extends pain. It was not one big betrayal, but 1,000 small ones, forks scraped too loudly, questions left unanswered, rooms rearranged while I was out buying groceries. And Julian, sweet Julian, had stood still for too long. But then he moved. He chose. He stepped away from her and toward his mother. Not just as an apology, but as a promise. He had returned to me not as the boy I once raised, but as the man I now respected. I had changed, too. I was not the same woman who stood by the stove in silence while Marta served store-bought pies and called them homemade. I was not the same woman who watched her son's face tighten every time she offered a suggestion. I was not the same woman who folded her apron and stepped aside when told she was too much for Layla's birthday party. That woman was gone not with bitterness, but with clarity. Now, I lived in a home that reflected me. There were spices on the counter, not tucked into drawers. There were framed photos on the walls, not stashed in boxes under the stairs. There was music in the kitchen, flour in the air, children underfoot, and warmth in the chairs. And in me, there was something else: dignity. Not the kind given to you, but the kind you reclaim. I had known pain, but now I knew worth. I was no longer simply a grandmother. I was this grandmother, the one who had unboxed her own life, rearranged her rooms, and planted jasmine where sterile grass once grew. The following Sunday, we had a full house. Julian brought a friend from work, Clara brought her niece, and Layla insisted we do a pancake contest, even though everyone knew I would win. There was laughter. Real, belly-shaking laughter. The kind that makes you wipe your eyes and forget the time. After dinner, as everyone settled into soft conversations, I slipped away to the back garden. The rain had stopped. The air was clean. The jasmine had opened in clusters, their scent lifting like a benediction. I sat on the bench Tom had built when Layla was born. He would have liked this, I thought. Not the drama. Not the court. Not the letter, but this moment. This piece, he used to say, "Charm, you don't have to be loud to be strong. But you do have to stand." It had taken me too long to understand that. Now I stood, not in defiance, but in certainty. I would never again shrink to fit someone else's comfort. I would never again apologize for the space I took up. I would never again confuse politeness for peace. The card was still on the mantel when I returned inside. A quiet symbol. Not of insult, not anymore, but of freedom. Because it wasn't a thank you. It was a goodbye to the version of me that waited to be noticed. To the version of me that mistook silence for safety. To the version of me that accepted scraps and called it love. That woman had served enough. Now I lived, now I belonged. And no one would ever take that from me again.